One, we're live.
Hello, good afternoon, and good morning, good evening. Welcome to this webinar, which is the third webinar in the series as we prepare for the sector ministers meeting. We will just give our colleagues a few seconds so that they can join, and right at the dot, we will be ready to start. For the time being, we welcome all of you that have joined on time, and we would like to ask that you put your name in the chat, your name and your organization, and where you're joining from. Once again, a very big welcome, and we're getting started momentarily. Could we go to the first slide? Thank you. So hello, good afternoon, good evening. You're all welcome to this webinar, which is the third in the series as we prepare for the upcoming sector ministers meeting. You're all very welcome, and we hope that you will be able to contribute and participate, and more importantly, use this webinar as you plan to engage your ministers and other sector stakeholders, including senior leaders in ministries of health, Ministry of Sanitation, and Ministry of the Economy. Before we get started, I will just go through a few housekeeping issues just to get us all acquainted with the platform that we're using today. We have simultaneous translation during this webinar into English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Please look at the bottom of your screen. You will see a globe, and if you click there, it will give you an option of the language that you would like to listen to. If you take a moment to do that, then you'll be able to hear us in the language that is of your preference. We also would like to encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat by putting your name, organization, and country where you're joining from. And please select everyone so that we can all see your name and details. Once again, you're very welcome. I would like to remind our speakers just to be able to mute their lines so that we can be able to hear only the one that is holding the floor. Now, as I was saying that this is the third webinar in a series, we come together today with a sense of purpose, and I would suggest a sense of urgency. As a sector, we have a goal of universal access to water, sanitation, and hygiene by 2030. And as the world, we have made promises to deliver on the entire SDG agenda. On a daily basis, the COVID pandemic, the economic fallout, and the climatic events create serious setbacks. And we all know the most recent data that a quadrupling of progress is needed if we are to meet our intentions of universal access. It is with this determination, the kind of determination that we've seen in sanitation and water for all, even during the Millennium Development Goals, it is with this determination that we would like to accelerate progress, that we convene this webinar entitled Building Forward Better, Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Solutions for Sustainable Recovery from the Triple Crisis. The discussion that you have joined today is part of the preparations for the upcoming sector ministers meeting, which is set for May 18 and 19 in Indonesia. The focus of the sector ministers meeting reflects our understanding that our efforts in reaching universal access to water, sanitation, and hygiene must go hand in hand with the efforts of our partners in other sectors. With a robust preparatory process already underway, we seek to support the SWA partners in defining priority actions and commitments through the mutual accountability mechanism. You will be creating together as stakeholders an opportunity for collective reflection, not just on the status of water, sanitation, and hygiene in your country or institutions, but also on how that relates to your country's or your institutions' commitments on climate, health, and economic recovery and development. To demonstrate how water, sanitation, and hygiene can contribute to those commitments and can also benefit from them, we have to work together to bring the actors that are outside water and sanitation so that together we can embark on this ambitious journey. The sector ministers meeting is a key stepping stone to generate the tidal wave of momentum that we need in order to reach the 2030 goals. With this in mind, today's dialogue will focus on two topics. Number one, the crucial role of water and sanitation to address the intertwined health, economic, and climate crisis we are facing globally today, what we're calling the triple crisis. And the second goal is to focus on the impact of this triple crisis on systems, services, and the solutions that are needed to ensure that the sector is not only protected, but also contributes to a healthy population, as well as green and sustainable economic recovery. The sector ministers meeting, therefore, is our opportunity to focus on the importance and put attention and the importance of investing in water, sanitation, and hygiene to secure greater growth and greener future. Let's use this moment to provide the evidence and experiences from different countries, from your countries and your institutions, where you are already putting into practice approaches that demonstrate the contributions of water, sanitation, and hygiene to the triple win. So we're here today for these crucial discussions, which pave the way to the sector ministers meeting. And our agenda will follow, as you can see on the screen, a presentation by the SWA Chief Executive Officer, Catarina de Albuquerque, who will provide for us the key pillars of our conversation today following the topic. And then she will moderate a discussion with Dr. Eman Soliman, who's the head of planning, sector at the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation of Egypt. Catarina will also be in conversation with Dr. Melina Balderrama, who is the in-country coordinator for Bolivia Watch Program at SEI, that's the Stockholm Environment Institute. So Catarina will lead us first with this framing presentation, and then she will get into a discussion with our two panelists. And we're looking forward to this really dynamic conversation. And that will be followed by a question and answer session with you, the audience. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll bring them up to the floor. And then we'll have closing remarks, which will be delivered by Leslie Porris, who is the coordinator of the Global Water Leadership Program at the Global Water Partnership. So very welcome to all of you. Bienvenido a todos, and please let us enjoy the discussions. Catarina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sitali. Good morning. I'm sorry, I didn't put the globe. Now I put the globe. Good morning to everyone. Bom dia e boa tarde a todas e a todos. E buenos días a todas y a todos. Es un gusto estar aquí con vosotros y con vosotras y poder hablar de los temas de la tripla crisis.
It's a pleasure to be here with you to speak about the triple crisis topics in the framework of what we do regarding water, sanitation, and hygiene.
First slide. Dear colleagues and friends, the interconnectedness of our world has never been clearer than these recent years. A devastating global pandemic still touching all parts of the world. The reality of climate change pushing us closer and closer to a tipping point. And our economies also being interlinked, suffering shocks in one part of the world, shocks that are suffered in one part of the world are reverberating across regions. Our problems are deeply intertwined, but so are our solutions. Our work on water, on sanitation, on hygiene sits at the crux of these connected global challenges. We know that our goal of universal access to water, sanitation is jeopardized by these continuing crises, the health crisis related to the pandemic, the climate crisis, and the economic crisis. At the same time, we also know that, and you know, that investing in universal access to water and sanitation and hygiene can be a key way to lessen the consequences of the three crises. With good hygiene services available, the reach of this pandemic and future ones will be considerably diminished. We will have an additional layer of protection. With resilient access to water and sanitation, the most vulnerable to climate change will be in a better position to adapt. In addition, we know that investments in water and sanitation can yield massive economic gains, and even beyond the money, investing in water and sanitation equals investing in good health for children, school and education for girls, and a more productive workforce. So investing in water, sanitation, and hygiene brings us fantastic social returns. As countries continue to navigate the COVID-19 health crisis, we know that governments across the world are trying to identify and also put in place measures to support long-term recovery. Last year, the UN Secretary General declared that we are truly at a crossroad with consequential choices before us. We are writing our own history with the choices that we make right now. And he added, it can go either way, breakdown and perpetual crisis, or breakthrough and prospect of a greener, safer, and better future for all of us. Next slide, please. No, not yet, I'm sorry. To ensure that we are actively connecting the water sector much more with other sectors that depend so much on adequate water and sanitation services, in order to develop policies which are more integrated and responsive to our interconnected reality. And now, next slide, please. While this is the opportunity before us, we must make sure that we don't allow this opportunity to elude us. According to recent analysis, current recovery policies linked to the COVID-19 pandemic have rarely prioritized green economic growth. We also know that there is much more to be done in order to foster greater understanding of and funding for the importance of climate resilient water and sanitation services as a critical part of adaptation. Overall, the estimated adaptation costs in developing countries are 5 to 10 times greater than current public adaptation financial flows, and actually the gap is widening. Here we have to say that the water sector as a whole is the main recipient of public adaptation financing with around 10 billion per year. But when we zoom in, we see that basic wash services only receive 1/10 of their adaptation funding. However, 16.7 trillion US dollars of fiscal stimulus have been deployed around the world in the wake of COVID, but only a small portion of this funding has been targeted towards adaptation. In June 2021, about 1/3 of 66 countries had explicitly funded COVID-19 measures to address climate risks. Water and sanitation are a critical entry point for bringing together the COVID response, climate action, and green economic growth. Next slide, please. In 2022 and beyond, we have several opportunities to advocate for more joined-up approaches. The SWA Sector Ministers Meeting that will take place, as Italy was mentioning, in May this year is a key stepping stone where we will convene in order to exchange and reflect on how different countries and constituencies have effectively addressed this interlinked crisis. Coming from COP26 in Glasgow and building towards the next COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, how will we capitalize on the fact that countries agreed to double the financing for adaptation? What will we be doing to make sure that water and sanitation services contribute to lower the emissions? While countries continue to consider and implement pandemic response plans and economic recovery plans, what will we be doing to making sure that water and sanitation are not left aside, but are rather central components of recovery? I remember in the past years, during the COVID pandemic, talking with some of our partner ministers who were telling me that even though COVID task teams had been created at the national level, with COVID task teams that are playing a fundamental role in designing economic recovery plans, what some of the ministers told us was that they had not been invited to the task team. The water and sanitation ministers were not invited to the task team. So they are not being invited to be part, to contribute to these important economic recovery plans, which means water and sanitation are effectively being left aside in all of these discussions and decisions that will frame the economic response for the years to come. While we all prepare for the 2023 midterm event of the UN Decade for Action on Water, as we call it shortly, the UN Water Conference next year, what actions are you taking? Are we taking together in order to ensure that our steady progress towards SDG 6 and towards realizing the human rights to water and sanitation is not diverted, but rather steps up and continues with determined focus and impact on all the SDGs? So these are the questions and the thoughts that I leave you with right now. And Sitali, if you allow me, I will move immediately to the panel discussion. I think next slide, please. And as Sitali mentioned, this will be a discussion. Somebody is saying that I'm not audible. Between Dr. Iman Soliman, who is the head of the planning sector at the Ministry for Water Resources and Irrigation of Egypt, and Dr. Melina Valderrama, who is the in-country coordinator in Bolivia's WATCH program at the SEI, the Swedish Environment Institute. So very warm regards to both of you, to Dr. Eman and to Dr. Melina. And I will start with you, Dr. Eman, if you allow me. The Mediterranean countries are looking for responses that not only address the impacts of COVID-19, but also tackle long-standing challenges in the region, including access to water supply and sanitation services for their populations. With more than 250 million inhabitants by 2040, the Mediterranean coast, where I also come from, will experience an increase in water stress. I visited Egypt some years ago, also to get a better idea of the situation regarding access to water sanitation, and it's obvious that I learned about your dependence on the Nile and on the challenges that your country faces with almost no irrigation and no precipitation at all. So with all these challenges in mind and living in a country that is struggling so much with water scarcity, water security, can you tell us how decisions are taken in your ministry in order to make sure that drinking water services are part of the solution? And as head of the planning sector in the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, can I ask you, how are you coordinating with your fellow colleagues, for example, in the Ministries of Health, Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Environment, in order to ensure a coordinated response and also a green recovery? Dr. Eman, over to you, please.
I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain how in Egypt we are managing the water sector, especially for drinking water. Actually, we are suffering from scarcity. We are depending on Nile, and also the Nile share is about 55.5 billion cubic meter. However, our needs and our demand reaches up to 80 billion cubic meters. So we have about 22%, 22 billion cubic meter as a gap. In the water sector, actually, we give it high priority. So the drinking water is the first priority for availing and allocating the water quota. So we avail the water for the water drinking water at first, then we see additional uses like industrial, navigation, and the agriculture sector. We reached up to 99% of delivering water to houses and 67% of wastewater treatment facility for houses. We have now an ambitious plan to expand the desal water for the coastal area, as we are suffering from water scarcity and we cannot avail and deliver water for remote areas. So we decided to replace all the areas feeded on the coastal governorates with desal water, which is too costly, but we don't have other choices because we don't have other sources. Now we have planned to desal water with about 3 billion cubic meter within 2030 years. So we have to desal about this a huge amount of water within 10 years. On the other hand, we started to depend on the drainage treatment in agriculture sector, and we already implement one of the mega project, which is called Bahr al-Baqar, where we have a mega treatment planet for the agriculture drainage water treatment to be reused in the agriculture sector. So we avail the service and the fresh water for the drinking purposes. We depend to refill the gap in the agriculture sector on the treatment of the drainage water. So this very new technique, and also a very strong institutional setup to take decision in different issues related to the water. We have a ministerial committee headed by the Minister of Water Resources, and include in its structure representative from Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Housing, and Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Electricity. All stakeholders are represented in this committee, and we meet each month to discuss all the water-related issues regarding either in drinking water or other purposes of water uses. And we have a unified monitoring network for water quality in all our water network. The body who is responsible about taking samples for water resources in Ministry of Health, they have a routine to measure the water quality for the surface water and for drinking water each month, and they submit their report to the cabinet and to all concerned bodies. For the drainage water, we have the Ministry of Environment taking this sample and takes the role of controlling the water quality in the drainage waterways. So we have very structured committee working to supervise the water activities inside the country. And we have also developed the National Water Resource Plan with consultation and with partnership with 9 ministries. So I believe as a water is a top priority in my country, we have taken very serious structural and institutional setup to have the decision based on discussion and based on dialogue among all concerned parties.
And Dr. Eman, thank you so much for your explanations and for letting us know with your very hands-on and direct experience, for letting us know about how your ministry and your directorate are coordinating with others in the country regarding the issue of water and sanitation. Let me now address you, Dr. Valderrama. Water management, together with access to water supply and sanitation, pose critical development challenges in Bolivia. And this was highlighted recently by recent climate change impacts, such as the 2017 water supply crisis in La Paz, and by widespread flooding in Cochabamba in 2018. The Stockholm Environmental Institute in Bolivia coordinates the program called Wash Thinking, Connected to Hydrology, that promotes innovative wash solutions linked to Bolivia's National Watershed Program. This program is including now a second phase that links to the COVID-19 recovery plans. Can you tell us a little bit more about this link? Water management on the one hand, water sanitation and hygiene or WASH on the other hand, and also the COVID response? Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Para mí es un honor.
Thank you. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be with you at this forum, sharing thoughts with so many important people from so many different places. Thank you very much. I am the coordinator of the Bolivia Watch program from the SEI in Stockholm. That's been working in Bolivia for over 10 years. And in the WASH program in Bolivia, we are setting the basin programs, including sanitation in the basin planning. To give you some framework, I'll tell you that Bolivia is one of the 20 countries with the largest water resources. However, in the rural areas, sanitation does not even cover 50%. So as you can see, distribution and water distribution and management is not connected, and it's not meeting the goals set for 2015. So our program is setting 3 main programs for 3 basins, including sanitation as a central or core element. We have been learning very important things during the pandemic, and I could mention that we are setting these plans bottom up and top down. Top down when we say that the science knowledge, because the ECI is a think tank, is an ideas laboratory, and they think of public policies that are brought down. But when I say bottom up, is that the needs of the population and the ecosystem are very important. The pandemic forced us to lose contact with the people we discussed to know about the challenges. And we've had challenges such as the technological divide, because some experts did not have laptops to work from home. They could not connect to the internet sometimes. So that was the first thing we tried to solve. We tried to close the digital gap and bridge it. And we also tried to build capacities. Now it's very easy to send a Zoom link for a meeting, but 2 years ago, most of the people did not even know that existed, especially in rural areas where we work. So if we look at the work we do in the basin in Bolivia, the water management is fragmented. We have a sub-ministry for water resources and irrigation, and another sub-ministry for drinking water and sanitation. They have parallel policies and that do not meet. So when we think of the basin, we need to take into account of everything, of water, sanitation, but also we have to understand the point of view of users and the community, because the lack of sanitation also has an impact on the source in the basin. So we have been collecting field information, covering 80% of our communities and 90% in other basins, and we have collected data on water structure, water quality, water provision, and the role of men and women in water management. And obviously, that information allowed us to relate this to the pandemic. With the scientific tools we have, we've been able to model the basing and escalate it. And this way, we have been able to understand well the people who use that water and who did not have sanitation. Our approach with the Swedish Institute is quite a challenge. And for the vulnerable population that do not have access to sanitation, well, they become even more vulnerable to the pandemic. And it's important to take into account that in rural areas where the percentage of sanitation is lower, people are rejecting being vaccinated. So we, collecting data and modeling the basin, respect everyone's rights, because in our country, vaccines are not mandatory, but we do have the duty to let them know about the increasing vulnerability when there is no access to water on sanitation. So for us, working in a COVID context allowed us to develop a strategy for local strengthening, transferring the monitoring ability and accelerating the transfer of knowledge, because we could not receive international missions. So part of the work done by international scientists had to be transferred to our country. And this was a way to empower our country with data and information that is now being interpreted and it needs to be put into perspective. So our main plans are quite challenges. They include the basic planning, sanitation, the multidimensional analysis of poverty, including vulnerability, gender gap, and poverty gap, and also the climate change approaches and new perspectives, new models, new ways to show the impact. And this, in this second phase, we can now link the effect of the pandemic. Now is the COVID-19 pandemic, but it could be different in the future. It could change, or it could be another one. But we have the right directions. We have created a momentum, and we have created an important setting. We can't think of water management without considering all the variables, all the metrics. Our managing plans must be considered from the point of view of health and also from the point of view of economics. So working on water is guaranteeing better water conditions and better conditions for the subsistence of our ecosystem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was fascinating.
Thank you, Melina, for your presentation. I think it was really fascinating.
It was very interesting,
particularly on the way how you are integrating science with the practical management, as you mentioned, of the at the level of the basing, at the local level, and the way, well, I really loved your expression, how they have put a face to the people who have not access, and people who are often treated as a number, a percentage, as our work is doing many things. I also think that it's just fascinating to hear the way how they are integrating the different aspects from the point of view of the vulnerabilities, the poverty, etc., in all the work that they are doing around sanitation. So really interesting. And my congratulations for that. I cannot see on the chat. Oh, yes, I can see here there is a question from Leonardo Tambusi. And he's asking, I don't know whether you can see, Melina, they have used the experience as a success, case of success, in order to apply to other communities. I think that is a question. And then apart from the strengthening and empowerment of these societies, how did you manage to mobilize the local government, if you did, in order to go beyond external financing? This is a really good question, I think, Melina. What do you think? Let me start with the last one, because this is what is really nearer in time and what we have seen most of the consequences with regard to these sectorial policies. The national basing plan, we have defined a body for the management of the wills, so to speak, with participation of the top authorities from the different municipalities and the governance, as we call it. This is the largest regional authority, bridging together different municipalities. And we also have a technical committee represented by the technicians and engineers from these localities or municipalities. And we also consider the participation of this technical council, the participation of NGOs, universities, etc. And then we have a third body, which is this participative and social forum. So this is where we join together the political wills with the technical, scientific knowledge, the work experience, but also we have this, we have the representation from the civil society in this forum with the different sectors which are the most vulnerable ones. This is already defined in the policy, but when we move from the paper to reality, there is always a great gap. And this is where we are working now. Through the knowledge we have gathered, and we aim to interpret and to analyze with the actions that we are doing to show the benefits of implementing a management plan and the consequences of applying policies in these scenarios, and how much these decisions will cost in terms of money. And when these decisions and these actions of the management plan, the executive plans, they already have a timeline behind, it will be easier to commit mayors and governors to go for these type of investment, because if you take, whether you take or not this decision, we generate and we kind of model those different scenarios that will facilitate decision making. This on the one hand, and on the other hand, what was mentioned about scaling to somehow reduplicate this experience, since the CI is an institution that develops knowledge, these are the case studies that are generating these boxes which are made to measure for each one of the basins. We have certain important challenges because the basin is a territorial unit that has no own resources from the state. Those with their own resources are the municipalities, so they have the municipal or local sanitation plans, and we propose plans for those basins which do not have their own resources. So what we do is we give them a purpose, and as we make progress, we try to convince those with the resources and also the citizens, so that by way of exerting social pressure or using social knowledge, they can demand the implementation of these actions. For each one of these cases, we are trying to do it in a systematic manner. Our program comes to an end at the end of this year, and we will have a toolbox for each one of those basins, and those toolboxes will have a common ground. This common ground may be appropriate and may be transferred to any other basin. We will need to implement some adjustments, of course, but the actual basics of those toolboxes, which work in a joint fashion, will allow us to work in the interrelationship of these variables that we mentioned. Thank you, Melina, for your answer. Again, very interesting, very thorough.
I see that there is some discussion in the chat. It was provoked by John Oldfield, and it relates to COP27. He says that the Egyptian government said that COP27 will be the COP, the Africa COP and the adaptation COP. And John is saying, and we agree with him, obviously, that water, sanitation and hygiene are key to both, to Africa and to adaptation. And he's asking, how can we support the efforts of SWA and its partners to ensure that water, sanitation and hygiene and climate change adaptation will be a key topic of discussions in Egypt at COP27. And so what I can tell everyone is that since the beginning of last year, SWA started investing significant efforts in the area of water, sanitation, hygiene, and climate. We have been working, and Jose Resti, who is here with us today, and he has been our senior climate consultant. He has been working with our partner countries in order to support the integration of water, sanitation, and hygiene into national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions, and vice versa. We also, with other partners, some of them present here today, we contributed and we played a key role in the organization or in the creation or in the support to the first ever water pavilion at the Glasgow COP, and bringing the issues of water, sanitation and hygiene to the last COP. Of course, we agree there is a lot that can be done. And in the context of our high-level political dialogue working group, we have one of the co-chairs here today, our colleague Leslie Porris, who is working at GWP. We are bringing partners together in order to identify opportunities and find ways to infiltrate water, sanitation and hygiene into global events, including COP, the next COP. I'm trying to see if there are other questions. There is a statement from Liliana Pimentel from Brazil. Okay, maybe I will stop here and I will thank everyone, in particular Dr. Eman and Dr. Melina, for their intervention today. I will also thank all the participants that have been active in the chat, and I will hand over to you, Sitali.
Ok, muchas gracias, Catarina, y a nuestros panelistas. Ha sido un buen
Thanks, Katarina. Thanks to our panelists. We had a good debate. The experience from Egypt and Bolivia were really interesting indeed.
My Spanish ends at that point, but I really wanted to appreciate our powerful panelists, Dr. Melina Valderrama and Dr. Eman from Bolivia and Egypt. Katarina, you were right. John did provoke indeed a big discussion, and I think that people can also put a lot of these suggestions already in the preparations for the sector ministers meeting in terms of what some of the proposals could be specifically related to the sector ministers meeting in the country overviews. So we've got a good opportunity coming up in the next few months where ministers will also be gathering and coming together. We will keep monitoring the chat to see if we have more questions, and we will be able to get back to Katarina and our powerful colleagues if there is more that they could also provide us. But we're actually lucky to have two resource people that are knowledgeable on the financing and economic side, as well as on the climate side. So I have some questions that I will pose to them, and each one of them will take very, very few minutes to respond to these questions. And then we should be getting going with other questions that may come on the platform. So let me start with Catarina Fonseca. Catarina Fonseca has been supporting us as one of the senior advisors, engaging with finance ministries as well as sector ministries, fostering discussions between these two ministries to identify the bottlenecks to effectively using existing financing and to attracting additional finance. Now, Catarina, the question that I will ask you is much more about the circular economy and green growth. We know that these references to circular economy and green growth are surely gaining momentum. And we have an opportunity now with the sector ministers meeting to actually pick on the right evidence and ensure that we are fostering the right decisions. What does this mean for water, sanitation, and hygiene? How can countries articulate that water, sanitation, and hygiene are central for sustainable development and green growth, and be able to actually articulate the economic benefits without making water and sanitation look like a drain in terms of national resources? Catarina Fonseca.
Thank you, Sitali. Wow, thank you everyone also for the examples. I start with the not so positive perspective, and then with some practical examples to add to the examples of Bolivia and Egypt. What you see over these past 2 years is that we can see a lot of the narratives of discussing the water sector as being essential both to the health sector, and also economic growth and green growth. And we do see the water sector being prioritized politically as a critical sector. We know it's the backbone for the growth of many industries and economies. But we are not yet seeing the necessary budget allocations that are matching the political commitments. So going back to what Catarina said at the start, I think really a lot needs to be done much more by the colleagues in the sector to be at critical decision-making meetings. And what the ministries and their colleagues, we don't have to do this alone. They don't have to do it alone. They can involve allies in the civil society, national public development banks, which have been out of some of these critical discussions on finance, and also parliamentarians to influence the discussions on budget allocations to the sector. So a lot on it is to be at the right meetings with the right allies. And then I think I want to just give you some very concrete practical steps where we're seeing the areas of climate and green growth being brought, very practical steps where the coordination is happening in some of the countries. So I'll just give you 3 examples. So towards COP26, an important part of the process was that many countries have developed their or revised their nationally determined contributions. And this was done under the Ministries of Environment in collaboration with the water ministries. And for instance, almost all the NDCs in Malawi are related with the water and sanitation sector. So you have commitments at very, very high level, which already include this coordination. At the same time, a very practical step is for the water sector to develop and conduct climate risk assessments. This is more simple than it sounds like. UNICEF has fantastic tools, for instance, with a good step-by-step process. Why is this important? Because then you can understand the cost of developing climate resilient infrastructure, or how, for instance, to improve energy efficiency. And finally, countries like Rwanda, like Malawi, are now developing climate resilient finance strategies for the sector that include all of the above, the NDC targets, and also the costing under the climate risk assessment. So these are just 3 quick examples. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Catarina. That was a really fantastic, and I also love the specific nature of those examples, plus the fact that you didn't take a lot of time. So that has bought us some more time, and we might be able to come back to you. Now, let me move over to my brother, Jose. Mi hermano Jose, estás aquí. So Jose will come onto the floor. I have one question for you, and Jose, I have to tell you that you need to take Catarina Fonseca's example in terms of timekeeping. Otherwise, I will stop you. So the quick question for you, Jose, is this. In times of a global pandemic and with the climate crisis that we're living through, there are no silver bullets. Indeed, there are no silver bullets and to this economic recovery, and governments need to take complicated decisions. They need to makes very serious trade-offs, prioritizing investments in several areas. And everybody is knocking at the door of the Ministry of Finance with a ball in their hands, asking for more and asking for more. So WASH has proven sometimes as a cost-effective, WASH has proven as a cost-effective way to prevent COVID transmission. But WASH systems and services are also very much impacted by the impacts of climate change. Now, in relation to water, sanitation, and hygiene, what reflections do you have on things that we are learning from the COVID pandemic response that can be applied to climate action? And for everybody else, Jose's, Catarina was referring to him. He's also one of our senior advisors who has been working with a number of countries on climate and WASH connections. So Jose, what lessons are we learning from the COVID pandemic response that can be applied to climate action?
Vale, muchas gracias, Itali. Contestaré en
Thank you, Sitali. I shall answer in Spanish. Thank you for your question, and it gives me great pleasure to be part of this session and this really important discussion. Well, there are several reflections, really, when it comes to the lessons learned after the COVID response, which can also be applied to climate change. I would like to start with the most important one, arguably, or the easiest one to resolve, and that's the fact that if humanity and us really want to resolve a problem, we know that we can do it quickly. We have lived through a pandemic for 2 years now, and we'll know how we were able to make the procedures and do everything necessary to have vaccines readily available in a really short time where we never thought we could do so. So if we do the same, if we are able to do this with COVID, how cannot we react to the latest news that we have seen that the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which sets it clear one and over again that we really need a massive action right now in order to devote large costs now and in the future, because otherwise we will suffer from many issues if we do not attend to those needs on climate change. So we are able to act quickly, but with climate change, we have been working around for more than 15 years and we are not able to react. So a lesson learned could be, well, let's work together, let's get our act together, because if we see these parallelisms with regard to the response to COVID and how to respond to climate crisis, we will see that one of the lessons learned, we see that climate change requires massive cooperation. COVID took everyone by surprise, and we put our effort together and we started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So we will see if we are able to learn from this so that the climate crisis does not get any worse. The moment is now to catalyze and to double the efforts in terms of cooperation and to come hand in hand and work together with the environment ministries, with the water, sanitation and hygiene sector, with the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Health. We need to work together because we cannot afford to miss the opportunity to use the economic recovery, the recovery in terms of health, not to work on the climate crisis and to put on the table the solutions that would lead us to this threefold earning of investing in water, sanitation and hygiene. And if you allow me, let me just give you another reflection. We have learned after the COVID that it is essential to have early alert, early action in order to save lives and to save livings. And this is another field that we need to work around when it comes to responding to a climate crisis. We need to anticipate, we need to really understand the impact of climate change on our sector, on WASH, through studies, through risk analysis, and we need to start early alert systems as we are learning with COVID, and to prepare and anticipate whatever that might come our way. And this is all from me, Satali, and I hope I answered your question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was perfect. It was great, Jose. And I think you give us really good pointers. The fact that we should also be looking into early warn alert systems and be able to use those more effectively. I think that one of the key issues here is that for most of these public health pandemics, water and sanitation will almost inevitably always be the first point of call in terms of that line of defense. So we always have to be ready. And then I think we also in these conversations need to go beyond water to also look at how sanitation and hygiene actually also are impacted, but what can be the response strategy also from that angle. Now, before I get to Leslie, who will give us a good summation of the conversation that we've had today, I would like to just get back to Katarina de Albuquerque to respond to one quick question. Katarina, we've heard so much today. We've heard so much today from yourself, from Egypt, from Bolivia, from the other Katarina, from Jose as well, and also from the questions that we had. How do we bring all this together in the preparations for the SMM? What should we do tomorrow when it comes to this process? Thank you.
Thank you, Sitali. Well, as we have been saying today at this webinar, this SMM is not business as usual. So if you ask me, Sitali, what should those participating at this webinar do tomorrow? They should invite for lunch their colleagues sitting in other ministries, in the ministries of health, in the ministries of the environment, in the ministries of economy, for lunch or for coffee or something. Make friends in the other ministries, talk to them, and make sure that you put water, sanitation, and hygiene on their agendas, and make sure that they become as committed as you are to solving, to addressing the water, sanitation, and hygiene crisis together with the economic, the health, and also the climate crisis. And then make sure that that not only your other colleagues in the ministries, but also other stakeholders from the other sectors join the discussions. Also make sure that you join their discussions, the discussions happening in the other sectors. Put, please, key priorities and options in front of your minister, but also the other ministers through the country overviews. Form a strong national coalition that will work on these matters together. Table and review your own commitments made in the context of the mutual accountability mechanism, and make sure that when you look at them, when you review the commitments or table new ones, you take into account health, you take into account the economy, and you take also into account the green recovery, climate, and the environment. And then, at last but not least, as I was saying, make these interconnections happen at country level as of tomorrow, and then make sure that not only your minister responsible for water, sanitation, and hygiene, but also the ministers responsible for the other connected sectors, that they all come to the meeting in Jakarta. I think that if we want to call the meeting a success, it cannot only have ministers responsible for water, sanitation, and hygiene in the room. We cannot continue just preaching to the converted. We need one key success factor is having the other ministers of the other sectors also coming to Jakarta and having these discussions with us. Over and thank you.
Thank you so much, Katarina. That was very clear. And may I invite to the floor our wonderful colleague, Leslie Porris, who's just moved over to the Global Water Partnership. And so glad you're still engaging with SWA, Leslie. What did you hear today, and what are sort of the key takeaways that you have from today's conversation?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sitali, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to be here. I feel like Katerina just, said a lot of things that I could have very easily said. So, but that's, I know, well, it's okay. I think we heard some really interesting things today, and all of this tying into how can we prepare now to have the most productive sector ministers meeting possible, and one that is not, as Katerina said, is absolutely not business as usual. We heard really great examples, especially, in terms of really integrated planning efforts that are already happening in Egypt. And this is appropriate because we know that Egypt is going to be a major player in the water conversation, at least in the coming year, positioning water to appear very strategically at COP. Right, building on the inroads that we made just this last year as a community. Then we also heard from Bolivia, less from the government perspective, but really how the importance of data can really help us drive improved decision making. And I know a number of us, including GWP, is collaborating really hard right now to understand and provide data that can really inform and influence decisions. This ties in a lot to what Jose was speaking about in regards to the need for early action warning systems regarding understanding deeply the impacts of climate change on people, on livelihoods, therefore on the economy, and really sort of working together to make sure we have the right data collecting, monitoring systems in place to drive participatory and informed decision-making. I really liked also what Katerina Fonseca was emphasizing beforehand, not just about the WASH financing and climate resilient financing strategies that are underway, but reminding us all that we don't have to do this alone. Right. And that's exactly what SWA is doing right now in bringing all of these different actors together. The decision that SWA has made to change the nature of who attends the sector ministers meeting and opening up not only to our near and dear WASH community, but also really inviting in the water resource management and climate components of the issue, really bringing, we are in this together, and the more that we talk and the more that we figure this out, how does working together look? What does that look like? Finding those points of intersection and connection. We're still in the process of doing that, and that's this preparation for the sector ministers meeting can really help us to get there. I also really liked what Katerina said in terms of being at the right meetings with the right set of allies. And I think, again, this is the opportunity for us to build those relationships. I think the preparatory process from now till May can really help us to forge those connections, and everything, the whole list of everything that Katerina de Albuquerque listed, I don't need to repeat her. But then also doing all of that work now so we can really forge those connections at the ministerial level in May to then position ourselves better for COP27 and looking at beyond that. It was a great conversation, and we really, really hope that everybody will be coming together and driving this forward. If you haven't already connected with Sitali, he can help you to get involved with the different preparatory processes that are happening in your respective countries. So on behalf of the High Level Policy Dialogue Working Group and SWA, I'm just really thankful that you're all here, and I know and am excited to continue this conversation with everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I need to add anything more after these brilliant remarks and the perfect summation of the discussion we had today. I think we can all look forward to rolling up our sleeves and getting started with the preparation process if you haven't started. All the best, and please do get in touch with us if you have any questions, and we'll be able to engage with you from whatever organization you come from or from the government that you work in. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado. Obrigada. Have a good day. Thank you so much. Goodbye.